This narrative, this bullshit narrative that everybody who does a startup has to raise funding is just not, it's not true. And I have my 1-9-90 rule, which is I think about 1% of startups, we're on individual tracks, right? Is that the only way to do it? Go raise buckets of money and become Uber and Facebook. And there's tens of thousands of amazing, just B2B SaaS. There's like 50,000, 60,000 companies in the world, and the vast majority of them are bootstrapped. And they are incredible businesses for the founders, whether they just pull out profit or if they someday exit. We get way over indexed on building, and we think that the software is the end, is the value. You don't need to write any code. So why can't you then go beat that other company? Because the value is created by selling and marketing and supporting and building a brand and doing all this other stuff that's around it. We're not building Google in 2000. We're building a create, read, update, delete app with some settings that sends an email, right? As a founder, your job is to make hard decisions with incomplete information. And if you are making easy decisions or you're making all decisions with complete information, you are making a mistake because someone else can do those. I believe it comes down to 3 components, right? It's hard work, luck, and skill. If you get really lucky, you don't need the other 2. I find that the more things that I do, the luckier I get. There's this indie hacker community on Twitter who thinks shots on goal means I'm going to launch a new product every week and see what sticks because I'm taking a bunch of shots on goal. Yeah. That is one of the dumbest ideas I've ever heard. I think it's catastrophically bad because you don't just launch a product and it works. My name is Rob Walling. I've become a serial entrepreneur. Now I'm an investor in SaaS startups. Started as a construction worker and then realized I did not want to be. I was literally digging a ditch one day in the rain and I was like, this sucks. And I had learned to code 15 years prior on Apple IIe. And I was like, I think people make money. I think you can get paid to code. This is, when was it? It was the late 90s. .com boom is rising. I live in the Bay Area and I didn't know any of this. Like I didn't have any connections to the tech scene. I was just crazy. And so, yeah, I started going to the library, getting books on Perl and HTML and such, and became a developer for hire. Got a full-time job about 5 years in as a developer for a credit card company and a startup and a consulting firm, this and that. Realized dollars for hours maybe isn't what I want to do for the rest of my life. I started thinking, how do I build equity in something? And went down different paths, trying to acquire real estate, bought some houses all levered up in Los Angeles, and then eventually realized where I have an edge is in building software products because I'm a developer and I have no edge in real estate. And so eventually did that, bootstrapped everything. I've started 6 companies, 5 of them were bootstrapped, and I had a nice exit, kind of a never have to work again moment about 8 years ago in 2016 when I sold my last startup Drip.
I had another question, but you mentioned something that I came to the realization about. Anyone that realizes I don't want to just make money linearly and save it up for retirement. I want to make a lot of money a handful of times. Nassim Taleb talks about, like in his book, Anti-Fragile, that like he made most of his money, he could count on his fingers the liquidity events that like led to like most of his wealth. The whole point of your career is to cover the downside risk, but then set yourself up so you can make big asymmetric bets that could lead to a liquidity event. When anyone starts that entrepreneurial journey, they always end up reading Rich Dad Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, and like your assets are physical, like real estate assets. It becomes a boondoggle. I spent a lot of money just looking into that like path. Even though I'm like definitely not passionate about becoming a landlord and like owning real estate assets, I'm like, but I feel like I'm missing out if I don't try to figure this out. And then eventually it just got to the point where I'm spending all this time having a podcast about developing software products and tech products. And I'm like, someone out there, they're spending all their time learning how to get good at real estate. And I'm spending marginal time. Like, I just have to pick the game I want to play. What led to you coming to that conclusion that you're not missing out, trying to make money everywhere, Shopify stores, all that? Because I know a lot of like people in my network that are trying to do a lot of different things, even though they're in tech, and they could just get good at that.
Yeah, it took me several years to realize that. And I think what did it in the end is at one point I owned 4 houses in LA, 7 units. Sounds all glamorous. because, but it was a shit ton of work. I was basically nights and weekends hustling to get stuff done because it was like these low down payment. I was playing the game and the game wasn't working. I had a little bit of money. Oh, look, I have a net worth of a couple $100,000. But I was like, it's not all it's cracked up to be. That was my experience in the early 2000s. At the same time, much like you, I was doing it for the money. I wanted to make enough money that I never have to work again. Not so that I don't work again, but so that I can work on whatever I want. That was the goal. I want to be in control of, because I'm a maker, right? I want to make stuff and I spend my time the way I want to spend it. And so I haven't done anything for the money. I've done it all for the freedom. That's it. So what I realized is I was doing this real estate stuff during the nights and weekends. I started getting bored of it after 2-3 years. My wife went away on a trip to Africa for a month, and I was home, alone. We were married, but we didn't have kids. At night, I was just hacking on code and shipping things. This is 20 years ago. And it's 2003, 2004, 2005. There was no Twitter. There was no Hacker News. There was no Product Hunt. There was Slashdot and a couple other things. And I started a blog around that time. I was launching different ideas. And I was like, maybe I can make enough money from software that I could someday do what I want to do, right? That was the goal, to be self-employed with my own products. The conclusion I came to is I really enjoy building software. I really enjoy thinking about, talking about, and building products. And so that was where I was like, you know what? I'm going to take a hard run at this. Instead of nights and weekending the houses, we started selling them off right as the 2008 crisis. I think we sold all of ours in 06, 07. We did okay, but it wasn't as good as you might think. A lot of time spent doing that. And then I had what really convinced me, I think it was 2006, I had my first small win. A little software product called .NET Invoice. It was invoicing software written in .NET. It wasn't SaaS. You downloaded it, ran it on your own web server. It was making like $2,000 to $4,000 a month at every month. And I was like, it was nights and weekends. And I was like, this is great. This makes my house payment and it's super fun to work on and I'm learning. That was when I realized that this is possible. I don't need to raise funding. That was the other thing, is this narrative, this bullshit narrative that everybody who does a startup has to raise funding is just not, it's not true. And I have my 1-9-90 rule of say tech startups that start in the world. Maybe we could say software startups. I think about 1% of them should consider venture. I think about 90% of them should probably bootstrap. And I think 9% should consider raising some type of non-venture funding. I run an accelerator for bootstrappers, non-venture funding, or Indie.VC is one, friends and family, angel rounds. A lot of those wind up being non-venture. But the venture industrial complex has brainwashed us all, me included, back in the early 2000s, that the only way to do it, go raise buckets of money and become Uber and Facebook. And there's tens of thousands of amazing, just B2B SaaS. There's like 50,000, 60,000 companies in the world, and the vast majority of them are bootstrapped. And they are incredible businesses for the founders, whether they just pull out profit or if they someday exit.
Yeah. And the insight for me came from reading Felix Dennis's book, How to Get Rich. He talks about, if I could do it all over again, I would have hit like 30 million pounds. I would have stopped. Like he had a stop number because he knew that, okay, 30 million pounds, like that's FU money. You could do whatever you want, whenever you want. Even then, that's over what's needed to do that. When I realized, okay, at a minimum, just like with inflation and everything, by the time I retired, it's net worth of assets, like 4 million. And between like that and like after 4, it's just up to you. If you enjoy what you're doing, keep going. But you don't like, that's not like impossible to get if you're diligent. Even with normal index fund investing, it's faster when you pick a game that you're really good at and that doesn't feel like work for you to hack on nights and weekends. That's what really resonated with me when I started finding your work. A past guest of the show, Brendan Fortune, recommended that I talk to you for a lot of different reasons. But for one, I've finally been red pilled on venture capital with all of the layoffs. All of my friends got laid off. I got lucky, but just the roadmap decisions where you lose like a year of opportunity cost. They were trying to pursue something that would, do a marketplace business because those have higher valuations. And realizing that, hey, you know how you make a good exit from a company is if it's a good business with good economics and you could sell it for more than it costs. That's how you make a good business. And if it's software and it's just copy and pasting the code, that's where the bigger valuations come from. I just really admire your work and just love the alternative path that like you could just make. You don't need to like make a super hyper growth scale business to get to that point. I did the SaaS playbook, and then you said, go back to the start of the series, start small, stay small. What I thought was really interesting in the first part of the book is because it's a guide to developers, it's written to coders, people that know how to program, is that you encourage them to get away from programming as soon as possible.
Developers hate it. Hate that part of the book. Yeah.
Why did you put that at the start? If you want to own a business, you have to eventually get off the thing that makes you excited in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wrote that book 15 years ago. I wrote it in 2009 and published it in 2010. Do I think every developer who starts a company that becomes successful should step away from the code? Now, it does depend on your goals. I know some folks who have run little 5-person businesses doing $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, and they still code. What I want developers to understand, because I'm a former developer myself. I haven't shipped production code since probably about 10 years ago is my last line of production. I still hack stuff on the weekends. I just really, it's how my mind thinks. I was just learning Python just to learn Python because I thought it was fun. The thing with developers is we get way over-indexed on building, and we think that the software is the end, is the value. There's just not much value. You can go, any popular app, you can go find an open source version of it. Great. So now you have the code. You don't need to write any code. So why can't you then go beat that other company? Because the value is created by selling and marketing and supporting and building a brand and doing all this other stuff that's around it. The code in even a B2B SaaS company, codes for 10%, 20% of the value. It's just a product, right? It's all the stuff that happens around it. So that's why I was being pretty prescriptive. Every developer I talk to who wants to get into being an entrepreneur thinks it's going to allow them to code full-time and work on what they want. There are a handful, some that do that. For the most part, if you want to sell your business for, let's say, 10 million bucks, because that's FU money, probably in most places in the world. If you want to do that, I don't know a single developer who I'm invested in 211 or 212 SaaS companies. So I got a big data set.
Yeah.
85% of those are started, at least one founder is a developer. Vast majority, 80 to 90%, probably 85. I have a big data set. There are dozens of them doing millions or 7 or 8 figures annual revenue. None of those have a developer who is still coding. They are now managing other developers who code and doing pull requests and code review. And they might write some code, but the ones that are successful and get there fast, they learn how to delegate pretty quickly. And in a business, there are areas of certainty, there are areas of uncertainty, right? What's certain about a business? I know pretty much that I can write the code to do the thing in a SaaS company. We're not building Google in 2000. We're building a create, read, update, delete app with some settings that sends an email, right? I know they are very certain that someone can build that, whether it's me or you we hire. I know that we can certainly respond to support email requests and live chat. I know that's a certainty. What's uncertain? How are we going to sell this? How are we going to market it? How are we going to find customers? What features should we build to get closer to product market fit or to strengthen it? I don't know. This is all uncertain. So as a founder, you should be founder or entrepreneur, CEO. You should be focused on areas of uncertainty. So that's why I say it's not move away from coding as soon as you can. But if coding is very certain and it's your comfort zone, it's a blind spot. You need to be really aware of that. As your product person, I don't know if you code or not, but it's super fun to build things, man. And if you were to start your own thing, I would caution you. I'm the guy that used to bring coding books to the beach and read them at the beach. And this is what I do. I'm the maker. I'm a builder. I make shit on the weekend still. And I had to step away from it eventually. The only way I did was my last startup. I hired a guy who coded in Ruby on Rails. I didn't know Ruby. That was how I got away from the code. I forced myself to because I still wanted to do it.
Yeah, I got into a product through development. I just realized, diagnosed as an adult ADHD. Now I know why. The amount of focus required to write beautiful, clean code required too much Adderall to be good at that profession, for me at least. So I got into product design. I just thought this is a high leverage field, but sometimes it's a login page or settings page or an onboarding flow. These are known, but there's precedent for what good looks like, what are standards. PayPal has a website that shows their experiments for checkout workflows. And there's so much precedent, so much so that even like the frameworks that came up when software became like an industry, user stories, Linear in their manifesto said, yeah, we believe that user stories is an anti-pattern. This is from a time when people didn't know what software was and customers didn't know how to articulate what they want. Now they're like, I just want to press a button and get this result. Like, you don't need to reframe it as a user story. I really love design. And for the longest time, my whole career, I was asked, why do you want to do product management? Like, you'd be good at it. And I thought this is what good designers do: understand problem space, understand like what's the interaction design model. Another connection to you and your portfolio and your network is SavvyCal is like it was the calendar software I picked. I chose it for the interaction design because I got my bookings went up when I used their booking page because they have a different pattern. Every other calendar company makes you think and cross-reference your calendar. One small opinionated piece of design made me give my business to this calendar picking software. So I believe in power design, but at the end of the day, you need to understand there needs to be someone at a company, and ideally it should be the founder, that should know like what opportunities to pursue.
Yeah.
And like what order.
Yep. And as a founder, your job is to make hard decisions with incomplete information. And if you are making easy decisions or you're making all decisions with complete information, you are making a mistake because someone else can do those. The founder deals with such a level of uncertainty, which is exactly what you're calling out. What do we build next? How do we build it? How do we be opinionated about this, that, or the other thing? The reason SavvyCal is the interaction design is as good as it is because it's built by Derek Reimer. I've known this guy for at least 15 years. He was my co-founder with Drip, the last startup that we sold in 2016. And Drip was amazing, the interaction design, because of him.
Could you walk me through what made Drip successful? If we want to talk about the uncertainty and the skin in the game that goes into being a software company founder, because you do talk about in your book, like the SaaS playbook, the unit economics of a product market fit, B2B SaaS company is really good once you figure it out.
Yeah.
Problem is it's replicable because of how cheap it is. And so that leads to a lot of, you might have some high points for 1 year and then someone else, like just like Microsoft ships a similar feature and then you're in the existential mode. I'd love to hear the story of what made Drip compete with plenty of established players.
Yeah.
In the email space.
Yep. And before I do that, if folks are curious, I keep talking about B2B SaaS companies and a lot of them are boring businesses. Like Drip was email marketing software. It became marketing automation software. And it's who wants to build that? I did because it was interesting enough and I knew that it could be a good business. But if folks go to tinyseed.com/portfolio, they can see, I don't know, there's like 170 boring B2B SaaS businesses that I've invested in. It gives you an idea of the types of the niches you can be in. To answer your question though, Drip originally launched, my idea was just to have a little email capture widget. You would install JavaScript on your website, put up a little email capture widget, and it would send an email sequence. So it was a very small utility. This was 2012. Who would you use for that today? Opt-in Monster, Bounce Exchange, Sumo.com, any of these. In order to do this, we did it on my prior SaaS called Hittail. I told Derek Reimer, who was a contractor working for me at the time, Derek, here's what I want. Email capture widget on every page, email sequence. It took him 40 hours of work. This guy's a smart guy. He had to get a bunch of open source JavaScript tools, hack them together, and then he piped it into MailChimp and wrote the sequence. I was like, that should be easier. So that was the original idea. Okay. So me, the founder, making hard decisions with incomplete information. Will people want to use this? I don't know. So I emailed a few people. I got like 10 yeses. I said, great, let's build it. That's confirmation enough. So we launched a few months later. It took not crickets, but we really didn't have product market fit. And it took about 14 months. So we had a working product, first person paying us. 14 months later, we had what I'm calling strong product market fit. I view product market fit not as a binary, but as a continuum. And from launch, it was about 8 or 9 months. That was a public launch. It was really hard. The reason that it worked, though, was number one, because it came right at this time where there were a bunch of email marketing SaaS apps like MailChimp, Aweber, constant contact. None of them had any type of automation. It was pre-automation. Then there were these marketing automation providers, which was like, now it's HubSpot, right? But like Infusionsoft, which is called Keep. ConvertKit wasn't there yet. Marketo, Pardot, and Silverpop. These things were very expensive, $400 a month and up. And it was a sales process, annual commit, $2,000 onboarding. There was this community of people who were like, I just want to pay $50, $100 a month. I don't want to do the onboarding. I don't want to do annual. And so we happened to just slide in, but it wasn't luck. I also happened to see the gap. We got 100 pieces of feedback of here's how to make Drip work. It plateaued at 8,000 or 9,000 a month, which with my audience at the time and my experience, that was an abysmal failure. And so I was like, no, I want it to be $100,000, $200,000 a month. I want to bootstrap a multi-million-dollar business. So I got all this feedback and it was just like, I don't know which of these to listen to. Eventually it was like, I figured it out. Hard decision, incomplete information. And I said, let's try to build email marketing and then become marketing automation. It took us 8 months of building or 6 months of building or something to get there. And there were signs along the way that it was working, but that's really what happened. And so we were the first lower cost, start at 50 a month, really strong UX because Derek was building it. Kit followed that, right? ConvertKit came out a year or two later and was a similar idea. And we went in different directions. He went after bloggers and I was going after more software companies and e-commerce. But that's why it worked. I like to think we did things right. We built a great product, but also I marketed and sold the shit out of that thing and got a little lucky hitting that gap. But I find that the more things that I do, the luckier I get, harder I get, the luckier I get. I don't want to dismiss luck because luck plays a part in all this stuff.
Well, it just goes back to the latest business guru. I'm trying to make these episodes timeless. Alex Hormozi talks about what brand is. He's like, brand is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson being an obscure former wrestler, spending 20 years building his career, building a marketing infrastructure around his career, and then one day saying, hey guys, I have a tequila brand. And it goes to a multi-billion-dollar valuation. The people that seem to get lucky are usually people that have, like, over and over again, seem to have a good brand. Like, it's just they have this like good reputation and goodwill. That is an asset. And sometimes you have to build that asset at the cost of leaving money on the table. You said that you had an audience at that point. How long were you podcasting? What were you doing up to that point?
Blogging, podcasting, running a conference twice a year. I had an email list of maybe 10,000 people. I had written Start Small, Stay Small. That had sold by then probably 20,000 copies. This was like 2013, 14, let's say. Podcast listenership was probably 10,000 back then, 10,000 per episode. Blog at one point had 25,000 RSS subscribers before RSS just took, I was so upset about that. Talk about platform risk. So not huge. Today it's probably across all the channels with me and MicroConf, it's probably 125,000 humans like who I can reach through owned media, basically my podcast and YouTube channel and whatever else.
No, I'm still on the come up right now. Those numbers, I'm like, those would be fantastic. That's more than enough to have 1,000 true fans. And even then, you're highlighting the amount of work that people underestimate that goes into.
Oh yeah, I started building,
to, like, create the flywheel.
I started building an audience in 2005, and this was 2014. This was 9 years. I used to spend 20 hours a week blogging that was all nights and weekends. Crazy. People don't understand. Is this the only way to find success? I don't know, but it's the way I did it. I believe it comes down to 3 components, right? It's hard work, luck, and skill. If you get really lucky, you don't need the other 2. I've known one person in my life who got lucky enough that they don't have to work again. They put in some hard work and they had some skill, but it wasn't off the charts. Most founders that I know, and I know a lot of them who sold for millions, tens of millions, usually it's a ton of hard work, developing the skills along the way. And there's a bit of luck involved, I think. There's always a bit of luck involved. But what I find is luck is a multiplier. Basecamp is a good example of this. Jason Fried, DHH. I interviewed Jason at MicroConf and I said, why was Basecamp so successful? And he said, luck and timing were 1 and 2. We also did a lot of things right, but luck and timing were 1 and 2, right? He knows that timing is a little bit luck, or they saw where the puck was going. Here's the thing. If they didn't have the luck that we're ascribing to this, let's say Basecamp, I don't know what Basecamp does. It's not public in terms of revenue. Let's say it's doing 200 million, which I would not be surprised by. It's definitely in 9 figures. So 100, 200 million a year. Without any luck, this would still be a 10, $20 million business. It'd still be a great business. And so that's the thing that I see is luck is this multiplier of, if I hadn't gotten a little lucky shooting the gap with Drip, would it have been, it's doing tens of millions a year now. I sold it years ago. Would it have maybe peaked at 2 or 3 or 4 million? Yeah, maybe. That's still a great bootstrap business. The margins on these things is incredible. So again, you can take all the luck you can get, but you really can't create your own other than putting in hard work and skill. At least that's my mental framework for success.
It's shots on goal, which is why like founders, or I guess like when you can afford one, I think you said inflation might have changed the number, but I think, what was it, like $1 million ARR before you hire a PM?
Yeah, that's usually that's the pattern I see with SaaS companies.
Because you have to justify the salary of someone being a fixer, having shots on goal, not knowing the ambiguity, because you might only get 5, maybe 1 or 2 opportunities in the year. You have to be lucid enough to see it and act upon it.
Yeah.
I remember I listened to a podcast from DHH, David Handmeyer Hansen, for those who don't know. And if you don't know, like, look those guys up. They're an inspiration. He said that at the end of the year, he was talking about the difference between venture capital and just owning your own bootstrap business. He just said, we make some, at the end of the year, like, you don't get to do this at a venture capital startup. We just split like 4 million bottom line at the end of the year. If that's any indication of the revenue and the work they put in, there's something to it. And when I think about threading the needle, it doesn't mean like I made one decision and it led to this trajectory. Threading the needle meant I see an opportunity. Blogging is an opportunity, because you wouldn't have made it a part-time job if you didn't see the opportunity, but you executed on the plan to 20 hours a week for years, probably.
Crazy. Yeah. It's a lot of time.
And
like a waste paid off.
The first 4 years of the podcast, I'm like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And then all of a sudden it started keeping itself alive. But that's just hard to tell people. Let's stick it out.
Oh yeah. A couple things. You said shots on goal, and you're right, but you have to be careful with that, because there's this indie hacker community on Twitter who thinks shots on goal means I'm going to launch a new product every week and see what sticks, because I'm taking a bunch of shots on goal.
Yeah.
That is one of the dumbest ideas I've ever heard. I think it's catastrophically bad, because you don't just launch a product and it works. It took me 9 months from launch to get to a strong product market fit. The churn went down. That was 9 months of grinding, strategic analysis, of getting feedback. Drip would have been nothing if I was like, oh, it didn't work. Now on to my next thing. Like, that also is, be careful with that, because it's easy as a maker to want to make. Do I want to make 10 products, or do I want to make one, have it not succeed, and then just grind on it for 9 months doing marketing and sales and learning these hard skills that I don't know will actually make it work and getting better at it? Which of those do you want to do as a builder? Do you want to build? It's like offering, saying, you want to lose weight? Here's ice cream or spinach. Which one do you want? Of course I want to eat ice cream, but is that going to work? No, I just want to caution people that I have some pet peeves about toxic advice, or what I consider real anti-pattern advice on the internet.
That goes along with why I think the product management job family, Brian Chesky says, we're moving away from traditional PMs, and like a room of 5,000 designers, like, fuck yeah. And he asked the question, okay, instead of asking, hey, are PMs valuable? Maybe you should ask why 5,000 designers in a room all like involuntarily reacted to some information. One of those anti-patterns is they think their job is to ship. Right? So it's okay, we ship. No, we got to prove. The worst PMs I've ever worked with that really put me off and actually delayed me finally making the switch was making these obviously bad decisions, shipping garbage to say, we need to prove to the company that like we could ship. Yet like no, we just proved to the company that we made the wrong call multiple times.
Why do they think that? Is it a KPI that's being measured and that they're managing to?
These tend to be like Silicon Valley, like Facebook type PMs, where it's different now after like the ZERP period ended, but a lot of they built their career in an environment where you can afford to lose. People that go into product management, people that would have been management consultants or investment bankers, like that, the product management was like the cool new job after management consulting. They thought their job was, oh, I need to just keep the engineers busy, and we just need to ship stuff. And then if we throw enough darts at the wall, we'll eventually hit a bullseye. Like, where's the nuance? Obviously, the less you ship, the less you learn. But the more you ship, the more you could just blow up the business too.
Yeah. One danger of shipping is you over complexify the product. You just make it so complicated. The other thing when you're bootstrapped, if you're sometimes your advantage is your feature velocity because the bigger players, like so again, product market fit, I believe it is a continuum. I have 4 stages mapped out in a document somewhere from 0 to a million ARR. And so by the time you have like decently strong product market fit, you know what you need to build. If you have bigger players that you're competing against, it becomes more obvious because it is so not obvious when you're at 10K MRR, 5K MRR. The danger of shipping too much in the early days is you don't have product market fit yet. You don't really know what product you're building yet, often. The other thing is if you over engineer on hiring engineers. So it's, hey, I'm a founder and I have 3 engineers on my team and 1 support person. I'm shipping really fast, but that's not a great balance. Who's doing the selling and the marketing? But at least in the early stage, I've tried to quantify this as a huge amount of founder gut feel. There's an instinct, and product people have that too. I know product owners will put it in a spreadsheet and have this many votes for this or capture these into this whole effort that's all related. I know there's all that, which is something I never did because I'm not formally trained in any of that. And I remember when we hired Brendan Fortune, who you just referenced, he was our first product hire at Drip.
Wow.
After we sold the company, Derek and I had made every product decision for 3 years or whatever. And we were looking for someone who was really good. And we hired Brendan. And I was like, oh, so that's what you do for product. Derek and I would just be like, hey, all right, we have all these things. Well, here's a list I have in an Excel spreadsheet. And we go to a whiteboard and be like, what do we want to build next? And it was like, I think this is the one that's going to get the most customers. I think this is the one that allows me to market it the best. That's how I would pick it. And then we'd build it. And sometimes we were right and sometimes we weren't, but we were right often enough to grow it into a successful company.
So I think what I've noticed whenever you talk about it, Jason Fried brought it up in one of his podcasts, when people critique his opinion on how to work, he's since tempered it. When you read the early books, very opinionated, prescriptive on like how things should work.
Yep.
And now it works for me because I own my own business. It's my money on the line. Do you feel a sense of ownership is why it's more like intuitive for you? Because it's like, I'm the one that gets all the upside. And so I'm just going to make the call. And
here's the reason. Nothing pisses me off more than having to defend my decisions to people who don't understand what I'm doing. And look, I get what I just said is what every product manager has to deal with. And it's what every executive at every company ever has to do. And that's why I don't work for big companies. And I did early on as a developer. I was a good developer. I would write good code. I would ship my stuff. It really didn't have bugs. And I would be second guessed all the time. And I was like, you know what? I know what I'm doing. I don't want to deal with this. That's why I hated working day jobs. I honed my gut over years. I was not always right. I'm still not. We still ship stuff that doesn't pan out. But I wind up being right most of the time. And that's how I've become successful. There's a huge amount of luxury in the fact that I don't answer to anybody. That's how I built my whole life. I talked about wanting the freedom to work on anything I wanted. I also wanted the freedom to make my own mistakes and live and die by them. And to take the successes under my belt too, and take credit for those.
lately, when a boss second guesses me or keeps asking questions, I tell them that's a part of this podcast is building FU opportunities as well. Like having the network. It's like, I could go find jobs somewhere else. I'm here because I want to be here. Either let me fail and get fired on my own, or because I don't want to get fired by someone else's rules. If I feel like confident that the call is right, put my name on it and you won't get in trouble.
Yeah.
You could disavow me. But if I have to keep getting second guessed, then I'm just going to turn off my critical thinking and not provide enough value. Rob, is there anything that you feel like hasn't been said that should be said before we sign off? And how can people find your work? What's the most timely link out of all the projects you have going on that like would be the best introduction to you as well?
I think the thing that I wanted to say that hasn't been said on that last topic, which is I want to be clear. I don't mind people second guessing me if I respect their opinion and they know. If I'm a developer, I worked with a bunch of senior developers, and when they would say, hey, you're doing something wrong, I'm like, oh, you're right. I am. So I can totally take critiques. It was always the non-technical manager who was asking me shit that I'm like, I don't need to put up with it. What do you know about it? So I don't want to sound combative. I just don't have great memories of working. I'm unemployable. I realized that at a certain point. So just wanted to say that. People can keep up with me if they're listening to this podcast. They probably listen to others. Mine is called Startups for the Rest of Us. I just shipped episode 702 38 into the queue. I've shipped 52 weeks a year since 2010. That's one of the legacies of my life, that show.
It's impressive. It fills in all the gaps. I really love your podcast. I'm a huge
Appreciate
fan.
it, man. Thank you.
Rob, thank you so much for taking the time, and you have a good one.
Thanks for having me on.
Hey, listener, thanks again for listening to The Way of Product. As we power down today's session on the fusion of creativity and technology, let's solidify the energy you've gotten from our dialogue today. If you've gleaned insights or strategies that could turbocharge your projects, I have a small but powerful ask. Swing by the platform where you're hearing this and leave a review. Think of it as your digital high five to us. It's a fuel that propels this content to more creative technologists like you, amplifying the impact of the shared knowledge. So until our next interview, keep pioneering and pushing the envelope. Thanks again for lending your ears and your imagination to our community. Catch you on the next download.